Well, hi once again, and welcome to another edition of In Conversation, our Claresholm Public Library series of chats with interesting people from in and around Claresholm with interesting stories to tell. I'm David Paulson, the host of In Conversation, and I'm excited this week to have with us a very special guest, Bill Kells, with the museum, the Claresholm and District Museum.
Right.
And I want to talk about that too, Bill. Talk about your title with the museum. What do we call
I'm
you?
I'm the executive director.
Executive director,
with the
okay.
Claresholm Museum.
So let's go back to your time kind of pre-Claresholm, because you haven't been in Claresholm all that long.
No.
So let's go back to the Bill Kells pre-Claresholm.
I think I'll go way back with Bill Kells.
That's good.
Because probably a lot of folks in Claresholm don't know this about me, but I was actually born and raised in Northern Ireland. And I lived in Northern Ireland for 17 years. Finished high school, did 2 years of college there, and then emigrated to Canada with my parents and two brothers. And so that, I think, is part where I get the background in history and my interest in history. I know anyone that's been back to Ireland and toured it knows that depending on what area you go to, there's sometimes years and years and years of difference between the areas and how they've progressed. And I think that is true in my family's case as well, because my grandparents on my father's side actually lived in town. And they had all the modern conveniences, electricity, running water, Rayburn cook stove, all of that. And juxtaposed to that, the grandparents on my mom's side actually lived in the country. And they lived in a thatched cottage with an open turf fire, no running water, kerosene light. They burnt turf in the fireplace, and my grandmother baked bread in there, and I have to say it's probably the best bread you'd ever get. And they used to get the turf from a turf bog right on their land, but it was so damp down there they used to have to use donkeys to go down and get it with creels on the side. So for me personally, I was exposed to that difference in time almost. You could say probably 100 years of difference between both of those. So that was a big part of my start and interest in history.
Well, and the history of Northern Ireland, of course, is a very colorful and at times a very difficult history, but it's a magnificent history as well.
Oh, for sure.
So now, how did you progress through that and get involved in history at a more professional level?
That when I first came out to Canada, I was a draftsman, and I worked in the manufacturing on the drafting side, and I would take drawings into the shop, and I found that side of the business was much more exciting than being at the drafting table, and I had realized then that I wanted to do something different. So I actually worked myself into a supervisory position, and that went through several companies in progression, and then I became a supervisor with Fiberglass Canada, the Pink Panther people, and I was with them in a town called Mission, British Columbia, for 11 years. And Fiberglass Canada left me. I didn't leave them. And so I had been involved in the museum as a board member, and we had a building that needed restoring, and I had written grants for that, and we had a person lined up to do the restoration, and turned out that they couldn't do it. So with the company closing and them not being able to do it, I stepped down from the board and I took over as project manager for that, and worked with professional conservators, worked with folks from the province, and really got to like that type of work. And it was a fairly successful project, and from that the Kinsman Club asked me to be project manager for an old railway station that they were restoring. And also...
This is still in Mission.
This is Mission, British Columbia. And also a private individual asked me to be project manager for the old Mission Memorial Hospital, which he bought. So we did a restoration on the outside of that as well. And then in the 80s, the grant funding all dried up. So I actually came to Alberta and got back into manufacturing for a little while. but I had been bitten by the museum bug, and it wasn't very long before I took on a position with the St. Albert Arts and Heritage Society as the site manager for their historic sites. And so that's essentially how I got into the museum world. I went on a vacation because I'd heard all about the Alberta Provincial Museums and Head Smashed In, Buffalo Jump, Remington Carriage Museum, Frank Slide. So we took a vacation down to Daisy May campsite as the hub and set up camp, and then we had to go grocery shopping in town. So drove down one way to the IGA and bought our groceries, and then drove down the main street after buying groceries, and just saw all these beautiful historic buildings. Never thinking at that time that I would ever end up moving down there, but was just enamored with what I had seen. And went back and continued on with the Arts and Heritage Foundation, and then was looking at a commercial building on Main Street, but actually ended up buying a 1908 heritage house in Fort Macleod and restored that. So while I was doing that, I went to work for Heritage Acres Farm Museum in Pincher Creek. I'm just going to have a sip of water.
Sure.
And while I was at Heritage Acres, that's when I actually decided to really formalize my career in museums, and I registered for a certificate in museum studies program.
And when was that?
And that was about 7 years ago now, 15, something like that. And so it was a 2-year program, and so I got my certificate in 2015. So I from Heritage Acres, we had lived in Edmonton, so our children were still in Edmonton, and my oldest boy gave us a granddaughter. So we decided we would leave. I would leave Heritage Acres and go to Edmonton. And so went to Edmonton, and I was really, really fortunate to be picked up by Ukrainian Village. And spent 2 summers with them. And I recall seeing somewhere that you had been involved as an interpreter on horse-drawn wagon with heavy horses. And that was exactly one of the things that I did with the Ukrainian Village, was I was in interpretation with that. And I think it was one of the places that you get a real understanding for interpreting heritage when you incorporate the sights and the sounds and the smells that conjure up those visions of a past time. And I recall on a Sunday morning coming up over the hill from the farm sites in Ukrainian Village into the town site, and the grain elevator was running, and you could hear the engine putting away. You could hear the blacksmith shop where they were clanging on the iron, and they had interpreters walking around in costume, and it was actually like walking back or driving a team of horses back into the past. Yeah. So it was a great place to be. And we never did sell our house in Fort Macleod. We kept the house and we rented it out for a little while, and ended up sort of going back and doing more restoration work on the house, and eventually ended up moving back there again. And how I ended up in Claresholm was I was very fortunate to find the ad in the newspaper, apply for the position, interview, and was fortunate enough to get it 2.5 years ago.
2.5 years ago.
2.5 years ago, and it's been a great experience.
Well, you know, I have a confession, and that is, you referenced my background. I was at the Bayou Ranch National Historic Site, which is where I encountered the horses and the percherons and so on. But and I've always had a great interest in the past and in history, like you. But my confession is that despite that, I hadn't spent a whole lot of time in the museum here in Claresholm until recently, and when you and I got to work on some things over this past summer, and you gave me very graciously a terrific tour of the facility. And I have to say, don't be like me and not get there, because it is fabulous. It is a wonderful museum that absolutely everybody should see. And if you've seen it, but not recently, you need to get back there, because And that's something else I want to talk to you about. Over the past summer, and even going further back than that, COVID kind of resulted
Right.
in a lot of changes, a lot of developments in the museum. Maybe talk about some of the things, some of the projects.
Yeah, and that, you make a very good point. COVID, there was a lot of negative sides to COVID, still is, but there were some positive things that came out of COVID. In 2020, we did not open the doors at all to the public, and we really missed the public coming. And we instead brought the museum to the community through social media. So we really focused all our attention. Pretty much everybody working there was working on Facebook posts and taking photographs and doing research and pushing it out like that. We did have, with our board of directors and our strategic plan, we had certain things we wanted to accomplish in 2020. They got put on the back burner. And so we didn't get a lot of those initiatives in play. We didn't want to bring contractors into the museum. We kind of limited exposure to people, and in fact, some of us were working from home as much as we could through part of it. So what resulted was we didn't spend a lot of our 2020 budget for materials and programming. And so we approached council at the end of 2020 through Blair Bullock, the director of corporate, and he actually brought it to council for us, and they actually carried over the funding from 2020 and added it to 2021, which meant we had a larger pot to be able to accomplish some larger items. One of those being we were able to put booth lighting in all of the booths in the exhibit hall, and lighting then in the aisles and the exhibit cases, and turn off the fluorescent lights. And that just made a tremendous difference in the museum.
Fabulous.
Yeah. So that was one of the major things that we were able to accomplish. Another one was we have a major backlog of artifacts that have come in over the years, and it's one of those things that you don't always get to. So
Right.
we were able to hire Ali Hamaway to come in, and Ali's with us now until January actually, and she's collections technician, so she's going in and actually working on that backlog, accessioning them, documenting them, putting them into the computer. So that's another major initiative that we're able to get done because of being closed for COVID. So that's some of the things that you won't really hear a lot about. What you're going to hear about is the exhibits. And,
Well, let's maybe talk a little bit about those exhibits, because there's been a lot of excitement. I mean, we're talking here in the Louise McKinney building here in Claresholm, and of course that's she and the Famous Five are an important element in at least one of your exhibits in the museum.
Absolutely. And Louise McKinney is well recognized in the community, and we're so pleased about that. There's a lot of other communities where Famous Five members are from, and they're not acknowledged as much as Louise is. Like the library is named after her. There's a window at the church. There's a plaque at the post office, and over the gardens over at the museum as well. So she's acknowledged quite a bit. But we didn't have anything in the museum per se on Louise. So, and this is a project that I actually inherited. It was just being started when I came on board. It was with the United Farmers Historical Society, and through a grant from Alberta Culture, we were able to develop an exhibit on Louise and also honoring women in agriculture. So we finished that exhibit at the end of 2019, hoping to open it up on May of 2020 as a new exhibit. We didn't open. So essentially nobody really got to see that exhibit until July of this year when we opened. So that was one new exhibit. Now you layer on top of that what we were working on, and another project that I actually inherited was a virtual Museum of Canada project for Wings Over Claresholm, which is the history of the Air Force Training Base in Claresholm. And we had hired a consultant to do that project, to do the research, and to do all the web development for the Virtual Museum of Canada site, which is actually going to launch this fall. And we were able to take all that content and then put it into the exhibit. There were three videos. There's three videos, one overview video on the Air Force training base that everybody's got to see. It's a really good explanation of the whole Air Force training plan, the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. And then we have two individual pilots, Jim Millen and Jim Ashworth, who also speak in individual videos. And it's well worth taking in, it's well worth going to see. As part of that, we were also able to add in an exhibit on Ben Skaman. And Ben Skaman is a pilot who actually was born and raised in Claresholm, but not allowed to train at the Air Force training base because they didn't allow pilots to train in their own hometown. They found that they would dive bomb houses and barns and all kinds of things, and it wasn't good. So they didn't allow them to do that. So Ben actually trained elsewhere, and then went overseas and was involved in several really successful missions. One being wing tipping the V-1 rockets. He devised a plan how you would fly up alongside and tip the wing and then spin it to the ground, because if you actually shot it down, the explosives, 2 ton of explosives inside there, would actually damage your airplane and probably take it out of the air. So that was one thing he did. And then he was also involved in capturing a Ju-88 German plane, one of the most sophisticated and advanced, and helped. They were actually surrendering, but they helped guide them into Scotland, and they got all kinds of great information out of that. So Ben was a recognized hometown hero. So we also had videos, 3 of them developed on Ben. So there's 3 exhibits that are now open and can be seen.
And that became a big part, of course, of Fair Days, and the theme for Fair Days, and the theme for our parade, which is part of Fair Days, was Wings Over Claresholm. And it was really exciting for me to be involved with the parade and Fair Days, and to see how many individuals and organizations got on board with the Wings Over Claresholm theme and really got on side with you and all of that.
Oh, we were absolutely thrilled when we showed up at the fairgrounds or at the marshalling grounds that morning, and seen all of the work that had been done. And some of them took a tremendous amount of work to create what they did. And we were obviously the lead float because Ben was recognized as the honorary parade marshal posthumously. And so we were the lead float, so we didn't get to see a lot of it in the parade. But when we parked at the end, we were able to watch everything coming through.
Great.
So we got to see all of them, and we were really heartened by the amount of work that people had done on it. And we had 4 young volunteers that actually were on the Wings Over Claresholm float that were in period costume. And those weren't costumes that came out of the collection. Those were costumes that we rounded up from folks that had them in their homes, some of them still, and we had some unaccessioned costumes that we have in costuming that people can take photographs with. So we were able to use those and do that for that float, and it was a really great day. As was the opening over at the museum was really great, well attended, and
truly was, yeah. So now let's take a look at what's happening in the future. Now we're going into the fall and soon winter. So what happens in terms of the museum being open or not open, and take us through that process? Okay,
we were actually going to be closed on the 27th. Our summer students,
27th of August.
That was their last day. And we were essentially going to be closed. But we've got talking with the Friends of the Museum Society, who are absolutely awesome. They have helped us. They've done all kinds of work in the museum, and the gardens look so good because of them. We got talking with them about possibly opening on Saturdays, and they have actually put together a schedule of volunteers now to open the museum from 10 until 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturdays. So anyone that didn't get an opportunity to get down and see the museum before the 27th, we still have an opportunity. And we're going to go with that schedule well into the fall, and we'll see what the attendance is like, and what we don't want to overtax the friends either.
Right.
But definitely for several weeks to come, the museum's going to be open on Saturdays. So we still invite people to come.
That's great. And what about projects? Any new exhibits that you're starting to
Well,
get going on?
we've got one. It's a smaller exhibit that we're working on for agriculture, or sorry, not agriculture, transportation.
Okay.
And so we had one of our summer students get them all prepared and painted the panels for that. So we'll be doing some research on photographs and interpretive information for those through the winter and getting that one ready to go. Ali is definitely continuing on to work on accessioning exhibits or accessioning collections that have come in, and we'll be putting those into inventory and putting some out on display, whatever we can put out. And we're also looking at and it's been an issue for a while, has been a space problem. So we're looking at deaccessioning some artifacts and looking at ways that we can create some more space. So we're putting together a proposal to take to council, and so that's going to take up a bit of our time in the winter as well.
So lots more exciting things ongoing with
Yes.
with the Claresholm and District Museum. Now, I mentioned earlier, and this will be our last point, but and you've made this point to me, that people sometimes get caught up in the fact that it's the Claresholm Museum, but in fact it's bigger than that, isn't it, really? The Claresholm and District Museum, that's important.
It is, and anyone that does come that hasn't been there before, they're going to see that actually the 8,000 square foot building in the back houses a lot of artifacts, and quite a few of them come from the MD. Ranchers and farmers that live in the MD. And so it is very much a district museum or kind of a regional museum. Yeah. And we would like to see it move more in that direction as well. And I mean, we have in Fort Macleod, we have the Northwest Mounted Police Museum, and in Nanton we have Bomber Command. We have great little museums in Granham and Stavely, I think, yeah. And so the size of our facility, we can quite easily fill that spot of being a regional museum. So we'd definitely like to move in that direction.
Well, that's great. And you know, I have to say, Bill, that your contributions both to the museum and to the community are just really tremendous, and we very much appreciate all that you do for all of us who are museum appreciators. And like I said before, if you haven't been to the museum, you really need to get there. This man, the friends, the staff, collectively have just done a tremendous job over there, and it is a fabulous museum. And I've seen a few of them, and I'm very proud of the one here in Claresholm. So
super, thank you very much.
So Bill Kells, thank you so much for being with us on In Conversation. As we wrap this one up, I'm David Paulson saying, hey, join us on YouTube, our YouTube channel for the Claresholm Public Library. See our conversation with Bill and a whole lot of other great conversations with other folks as well. Until next time, I'm David Paulson saying, see ya. Thanks for being with us.